Pursuing Theresa May's Brexit deal is still its top priority. It has now begun ramping up its preparations for no deal. Details of where £2 billion in funding will be spent have been revealed, whilst advice for the public will be rolled out over the coming days on everything from potential traffic chaos to credit card fees. With 101 days to go before Brexit, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
The days do not get any less extraordinary. A 3-hour cabinet today in which I would say a majority of the cabinet ministers round that table were discussing something they think would be an unmitigated disaster. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Amber Rudd, actually spelt it out in the room and said a no-deal Brexit would be a car crash. Theresa May knows that the Brexit side of her party, quite a lot of them, think all of this should have been done much earlier. On the Remain side, she knows that a lot of them think it is simply a scare tactic to try and get more MPs into her lobby backing her deal when she brings it back to Parliament in January. One week from when we had the Brexiteers trying to get a no confidence vote in Theresa May, you've got Remainers tonight saying, Anna Soubry and Nick Bowles, two Tory MPs, that they would probably resign the whip of the party and no longer vote with the Conservatives if no deal became the central policy. There were pot shots being fired at cabinet ministers, not very coded in that cabinet meeting there, and even talk of indicative polls to try and work out what policy Parliament might come up with, which kind of presumes it won't be backing Theresa May's policy. That was the cabinet today. Another day in the extraordinary life of this battered government and the Brexit project.
With 101 days to go to Brexit, the Cabinet today agreed to implement full-scale no-deal plans. It means the government is contemplating presiding over a crash-out from the EU, which the Foreign Secretary in August described as a mistake we would regret for generations. The Business Secretary has said would be crazy. The Work and Pensions Secretary has said is unthinkable.
We need to recognise with 14 weeks to go that a responsible government is preparing for the eventuality that we leave without a deal. That is the responsible thing for the government to do. That is what we agreed at Cabinet.
The plans include everything from buying space on ships to stockpiling medicines, plus sounding the alarm in messages to business and members of the public. The Defence Secretary suggested that the military might be needed too. Government sources said they might backfill police officers needed elsewhere for operations like traffic control for queues of lorries.
We've as yet not had any formal requests from any government department, but what we are doing is putting contingency plans in place, and what we will do is have 3,500 service personnel held at readiness, including regulars and reserves, in order to support any government department on any contingencies they may need.
Later in the Commons, Labour described the government's no-deal planning as an expensive bluff.
It's a political hoax, and deep down, I think the government and this Prime Minister knows it. I know from personal experience how seriously she takes security arrangements for the United Kingdom, and to put ourselves in a position where they'd be jeopardised is not something that deep down I think she thinks could possibly be acceptable for this country.
Former Minister Nick Bowles tweeted, "If the government were to announce that no-deal Brexit had become its policy, I would immediately resign the Conservative whip and vote in any way necessary to stop it from happening." Some cabinet ministers, like International Development Secretary Penny Mordaunt, think no-deal Brexit could be softened with side deals. She spoke of a managed glide path in a speech last night. The Justice Secretary David Gauke told Cabinet talk of a managed no-deal was fantasy, and the responsibility of cabinet ministers is not to propagate unicorns, but to slay them. The European Parliament's lead negotiator on Brexit tweeted, "There is no such thing as a managed no deal."
There are a number of scenarios being floated in government without, I think, people really engaging on the consequences of that. Either the consequence to our democracy of not delivering on the referendum, not having Brexit, or the idea that we can cherry pick and have some sort of managed no deal where the EU would suspend its own red lines, which I don't think is feasible.
Lorry jams have dominated the no deal talk. The government's imminent guidance to businesses and households will flag up many other areas. The government is working on 320 work streams on no-deal preparations, and they are, the Cabinet agreed, now its principal operational focus.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Brexit Minister, Chris Heaton-Harris, and I began by asking if he was confident of making a success of no deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, as a government and as an individual, I want us to have a deal and get that over the line so we have certainty in that way. But yes, I'm very confident that the government will deliver on its plans for a no deal.
Well, under those plans for a no deal, you have 3,500 troops on standby. You're spending hundreds of millions of pounds to ensure that there's clean drinking water in the UK. You're becoming the largest buyer of fridges to store stockpiled medicines. I mean, these are the kind of things you'd expect after a disaster in a third world country, not in Britain in 2018.
Forgive me, but I think there's a tiny bit of spin on that. We have no plans to use the army in any of our contingencies.
Let me just pick you up on that point. The Defence Secretary told the Commons that 3,500 troops were on standby if needed in a no deal.
Well, but
that's not spin, that's a fact to the Commons.
No, that is, you're connecting two things. There are absolutely no deal plans where we need the help of the army. But
they're there,
we don't
they're on
need
standby. I mean, these are the kind of things you would expect after an earthquake or something.
We are a responsible government that's planning for every eventuality.
This kind of scenario, these kind of emergency measures, seem the very opposite of a responsible government. I mean, Guy Verhofstadt today, the EU Parliament's chief negotiator, said it was the height of irresponsibility.
Well, I'm sure you'll be saying that about the European Commission's no-deal planning as well, or not, maybe in Guy's case. But no, we have a deal on the table. We've negotiated a really good deal for the country. We want to get that over the line, and so there's some more work being done on that. People have been criticising slightly unfairly the government for not having plans. When we slightly reveal the fact that we have been planning for no deal, there's criticism. I think that's a bit unfair.
Isn't the reality that you're only having to spend this £2 billion of taxpayers' money to prepare for a no deal because you can't persuade your own backbenchers to back Theresa May's deal?
No, this is a responsible government that's preparing for every eventuality. I think no matter what the parliamentary maths, until the deal was ratified, we would be doing this.
So this no-deal planning is a hoax to try and scare your MPs into backing Theresa May's deal?
No.
Tell me why not?
Well, because it isn't.
Do you accept that Brexit will cost us, any Brexit plan will cost us more than staying in the EU? Dozens of companies are moving part of their operations out of the UK in preparation. This is happening now. Brexit is costing us now, and it'll cost us more in the future.
So in every forecast, in all the Treasury forecasts, in every situation, our economy was growing in the future. The optimum
But not
deal,
as much as if we'd stayed in the EU.
But I think you'll find we had a referendum where more than 1 million people voted to leave the European Union than voted to stay in. 17.4
But did they vote to be poorer?
million people. People voted to leave the European Union. That's what this government is going to deliver on.
Regardless of if it made them poorer?
They knew they wanted to leave the European Union. And
even if it made them poorer?
No, the economy is going to continue to grow in every Treasury forecast that we publish.
But not as much as if we'd stayed in the EU?
Well, there you go.
But how can you be so confident that people are happy to leave the EU now? Why not put it back to the test, put it back to the people?
Well, I think you're kind of running round in a circle to answer your own question. If we were to go down that route, it would mean, the process for a second referendum would take more than 6 months. That means we would have left the European Union without a deal, which is probably not what people who are calling for a second referendum might want.
I noticed you just can't say, one way or the other, whether it's a price worth paying to leave the EU, and that will make us all poorer than if we stayed in the EU.
Well, I don't recognise your concept, because I actually think we've got a bright future outside the European Union.
The Bank of England scenarios,
my mind and your mind are in
scenarios say that we will be poorer than if we stayed in.
Yeah, and Treasury forecasts occasionally haven't been exactly as accurate as people would have liked them to be.
Why are you so frightened to put back all the options to MPs?
I don't think we are frightened. I think we've passed legislation that detailed this process that MPs voted for. We're going through the process. We now have a deal on the table that guarantees the certainty, removes some of the fears that you've expressed in your questioning, and I'd like to think MPs will vote for that deal. But the legislation was set out over a year ago.
Chris Heaton-Harris, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, the entire body politic is in the dock tonight. I mean, here we are with an emergency planning now going into action for a no-deal Brexit, which business is saying is going to be utterly catastrophic.
Well, it will be utterly catastrophic, but it's absolutely diabolical that after 2 years of botched negotiations, we find ourselves in this position. What we've set out are a number of negotiating principles that we think Parliament could coalesce around. A permanent customs union deal with a right for Britain to have a say in future trade deals, a strong single market agreement, a floor under existing rights and protections, but a guarantee that we would make sure that we went beyond those rights and protections. And we think that there would be a consensus within Parliament for that. We've had various parliamentarians from all parties discussing various elements that are similar to our proposals.
And how many of these people have been in Brussels trying to see whether any of these things were remotely viable?
Well, exactly, but we haven't been given the opportunity to put these options to Theresa May, and that's what the withdrawal agreement debate was supposed to do.
What happened was she splintered her own party, and then Labour's actions united it. The Tories are now tonight more united than they've been for the last 2 months.
Well, I wouldn't say that by any stretch of the imagination, and Theresa May is in a very, very difficult situation. But ultimately, she needs to put her party politics to one side now and give Parliament the opportunity to debate her deal before the Christmas recess begins.
The truth is the Labour Party's in the dock too. You have failed the people by failing to come up with some real viable alternative. And at the same time, you have been calling for an election, which you've not been able to get. You've been calling for all sorts of measures that you've not been able to get. And you've then not even been able to get a motion passed criticising the Prime Minister.
Well, look, no, that is simply not true. We don't want parliamentary theatrics. We want to see a meaningful vote on Theresa May's deal, and we want the opportunity to sit down within the Houses of Parliament as adults and discuss all the viable options that could be available to take our negotiations forward.
But if you go out into the country, you find that Labour's message is so confused. Nobody knows what you really stand for. You're not sure whether the leader's in favour of anything. And you have this situation in which, to be quite honest, Labour is now no higher in the opinion polls than the Tories.
What's confusing about saying that we want to have a strong customs union deal with a right for Britain to have a say in future trade deals, a strong single market deal that makes sure that we don't have any regulatory barriers, and a strong relationship in relation to rights and protections that protects consumers, our environment and our workers here in the UK?
We've got a situation in which the government is now going for emergency planning. We've got 100 days to go. Where is Jeremy Corbyn tonight? I mean, what is he saying?
Well, the thing that angers me about the emergency no-deal planning situation is that consistently, rather than allowing Parliament to debate Theresa May's deal, she's trying to engineer the option of it being a choice between her deal and no deal. There is no appetite within Parliament for no deal.
You're putting on a very courageous front here, but the truth of the matter is it's Jeremy Corbyn who should be doing this tonight. He's nowhere to be heard.
Jeremy Corbyn has been speaking to the press. He's been taking forward our arguments within Parliament. He spoke at length yesterday in the Chamber about the deficiencies in Theresa May's deal and what she needed to do next. But this is not just about Jeremy Corbyn. This is about our democracy. It's on trial at the moment. And we need to make sure that the deal that Theresa May was proposing to put to Parliament actually goes before Parliament. And it doesn't get kicked into the long grass until after Christmas so that she can engineer this fear-mongering project where she establishes a choice between her deal and no deal. That's not what Parliament wants. I don't think it's what the people of Britain want. They want a good deal that respects the referendum but puts the interests of our economy and our communities first.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. The front line of a no-deal Brexit is Dover, the critical gateway for trade between the UK and Europe. Today, the biggest customs firm inside the port told this programme that crashing out of Europe without a deal would create Armageddon, that's a quote, for the United Kingdom, warning that Dover had no chance of being ready to cope with the millions of additional checks. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this.
More than 2.5 million lorries have passed through the Port of Dover this year alone, carrying billions of pounds worth of food, clothes and medicines to and from the continent. Only a tiny proportion, about 3%, come from outside the EU and need their paperwork checked. But if there's no deal, all that will change. Back in 1992, before we joined the single market, Dover was a very different place. The gates here were locked and there was high security, and every single lorry passing through needed to be checked. Back then there were 130 different customs agents or companies that needed to do the paperwork. If Britain leaves the EU with no deal next March, then all these lorries passing through would once again need to be checked. The only difference is this time around there are just 17 different customs agents, and in the meantime the volume of lorries turning up here has more than doubled. And if you were told this week, for example, listen, we're moving to a no-deal scenario, we simply cannot get agreement in Parliament, could you do it in time?
Oh, no chance. It takes us 6 months to 18 months to train a customs entry clerk, and we have 35 trained customs entry clerks in our business.
Steve Appleby is one of the bosses at the biggest customs clearance firm in Dover. His team do the checks on the small number of non-EU trucks. It takes about 20 minutes per lorry. But for anyone who thinks it's a simple procedure, look at this.
It's quite a good example.
That's one truck.
That's one truck of what we as customs clearance agents in Dover and the UK do.
The point is, these types of checks happen for 3% of the trucks that come in and out.
100%.
In a no-deal scenario, you're looking at 100% worth of check
Paperwork, yes.
Could you cope with that?
No. We'd like to, and we'd like to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, but we need help.
The government may be talking about help in the billions, but so far just 8 million has been allocated for customs agents like these. Under a no deal, Steve says he'll need to go from 35 to nearly 300 staff, while nationally an extra 10,000 customs checkers will be needed. That's the view on the ground at Dover, but at head office, the chairman of the group had this even more stark message.
But having a no-deal Brexit and stopping on the 29th will be Armageddon for us here. It's not Project Fear, it will become reality. And that frightens all of us.
But some people would listen to that and say, well, hang on a minute, the government's never going to let that happen. They've secured a transition period. They're hiring thousands and thousands of extra border security customs officers. And they're planning for all these types of scenarios.
And unless they're training them to do the job that I do today and agents around the country do, they cannot do the paperwork. So their only option they would have is to open the doors and let it in and worry about the consequences down the line.
For Nikolai, the driver with the wad of paperwork, it's not plain sailing. The supposed 20-minute check on his cargo of clothes bound for Switzerland raised a query, which means he'll likely be held over for several hours. Day-to-day disruption Dover can accommodate now. But if there's a no deal on the horizon, he could find himself at the back of a very long queue. Siobhan Kennedy, Channel 4 News in Dover.
Don't book a holiday after March the 29th if there's no deal. That was supposedly a leaked government warning, although it's since been denied by the Transport Secretary as categorically untrue. But for businesses which use air transport to courier their goods, the outlook is even less certain. How will companies that have only ever worked in a customs union cope with the potential extra levies and paperwork they needed to carry on? Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshna Soni is at East Midlands Airport, the second largest freight airport in the UK. Darshna.
Well, it's a very wet and windy airport here this evening, Kathy. But if you're thinking of jetting off to warmer climes after the end of March next year, should you go ahead and book your holiday or not? Well, according to the Transport Secretary, the message is keep calm and carry on flying. He's dismissed suggestions, warnings about what could happen under a no-deal Brexit. Warnings about huge queues at customs, about planes not being able to take off or land, even about lorries being stacked up on the nearby M1. Despite his optimism, bosses here say that a no-deal Brexit would be damaging for the economy, although they say they're prepared for any eventuality. Some 5 million passengers use this airport every day, but but it's also the country's second biggest courier freight airport. What will happen to all those goods that fly in and out of here after next March? We've spent the day trying to find out. Another plane load of cargo lands at East Midlands Airport. If you've ordered your Christmas presents online this year and they're coming from a European warehouse, the chances are they'll be arriving here. From up here on the control tower, you get a sense of just how much freight this airport deals with. 1,000 tonnes of goods come in and out of here every single day. It's second only to Heathrow. And 80% of that trade is with the EU. But what will happen to all that freight after Brexit?
Yeah, I'm worried for both road and air freight shipments. There's a certain amount of administration that's needed to happen to get an import into the country and to get an export out of the country. And at the moment, the skill levels aren't there, the software's not in place, there aren't enough customs experts in our country to handle that.
Tony Shalley runs a freight forwarding company, one of hundreds that use this airport.
A typical parcel into Milan from this airport for delivery tomorrow could be £25, £30. Because there's no customs. You put customs on that, you put VAT and duty, it could be £60, £70.
And so what are you telling your customers?
Prepare for the worst.
And they are preparing for the worst behind the scenes at this airport, we're told. The managing director recently warned of queues of lorries potentially jamming the nearby M1 because of new customs requirements. But the government has played this down. At present, any EU airline can fly anywhere in the European Union under the Open Skies Agreement. A no-deal Brexit would require new aviation treaties, something the Transport Secretary has insisted can be quickly arranged. The government has denied an apparent leak from the civil service, warning that the public shouldn't book holidays after March 29th next year. But are there assurances enough to convince passengers here?
The problem is going to be in the border if you kind of demonstrate you have a work or you have a regular situation. But for the companies to fly, I think it's fine. They are selling tickets still, so.
So you're not worried about that so much, it's what will happen at the border if there are increased checks?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson and her husband regularly fly to their home on the Costa Blanca.
We don't know really, we don't know what position we're going to be in really when we're in Spain, but no, we don't know what's happening, do we?
And is that a worry?
I would say so, yes, I would say so, because our retirement was built round, having a place in Spain. So, yes, it is a worry to go over. We just hope the deal is good for us.
For now, the Wilsons say they'll keep booking their flights to Spain. But like the rest of the country, they can only watch and wait to see what happens in the 100 days ahead. Darshana Soni, Channel 4 News
at East Midlands Airport. Now, joining us now from Westminster is the former Business Minister, Anna Soubry. Anna Soubry, you probably heard him, the shadow, he's the shadow Brexit Minister, Keir Starmer, saying this is a political hoax. It's not going to happen.
Well, I hope he's right, but he's got to get his party in order and step up and be a proper and effective opposition. At the moment, they are not behaving like that. In fact, the only thing Jeremy Corbyn actually achieves is, one, in uniting the Conservative Party, and secondly, turning our mess into his mess.
But you're saying that if this does happen, they'll have you as an opposition to deal with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's almost outrageous that the Conservative Party, which is traditionally and rightly so, the party of business of all sizes, from all sectors, finds itself in the quite disgraceful position of even contemplating such a thing as a hard Brexit. I'm afraid to say the Prime Minister has made, and her government and her cabinet, a number of big mistakes. And one of them was to tell the British people that no deal was better than a bad deal. Well, not only has the Prime Minister come back with a bad deal, now she's actually preparing for no deal. She should immediately take no deal off the table. It is being used, I'm afraid to say, to make some of my colleagues, almost to blackmail them politically, to say, oh, well, if you don't want this dreadful thing called a no deal, which we actually said to you we shouldn't fear, but actually, of course, we should fear, then you must vote for Theresa's deal. And I say, no, start being honest with the British people. No deal is a complete disaster. It is the worst deal imaginable. Get it off the table and square up to the British people.
Nevertheless, they're planning for it. And if it happens, what are you prepared to do?
oh, I'm not going to hang around in the Conservative Party by keeping on with the whip if we embark upon this madness. And I know I'm not alone in that. Dominic Reeve has said the same. My colleague Nick Bowles, who I was talking to, which is why I was slightly late getting to you, so do forgive me. But he's made it very clear. This is the stuff of complete madness. But it's deeply, profoundly irresponsible of the government to be making these plans when it can clearly take no deal off the table.
Well,
It's also costing your viewers billions of pounds of money that could be much better spent, frankly.
Can you just clarify for us, Anna Soubry, what has happened today? There's been this explosion saying, you know, that we are now facing Armageddon, quoting this man running the docks down in Dover. Armageddon. I mean, why suddenly today?
Well, to be honest with you, John, some of us, and I know Channel 4 News is one of the best, if not the best broadcaster on this.
Steady.
We have, of course, here's the thing, you're not going to disagree with that. But in all seriousness, you know, some of us have been talking about these things. We have been explaining to people the options. We've been explaining to people the dangers, what looks like the strategy of the Prime Minister. We've been saying these things, and sadly, very few people have been reporting them, and probably even less taking them seriously. All of this has been predicted. And of course, most importantly, British business has been saying this as well. And again, these things have not been reported. Or more importantly, British business has been saying them in private when they should have been saying these things publicly. Look, the truth is, I'm afraid, and it's to me no pleasure to say this, too many of my colleagues simply have either kept their heads under the sand because it's all too much and it's too difficult, the reality of Brexit, or they just simply haven't understood the harsh realities of Brexit. And they've all of them got to face up and wake up to the realities of Brexit. And the first thing the PM's got to do is to take this outrageous idea of no deal, or even more bizarre, a managed no deal, off the table. It is very bad.
Thank you very much for talking to us. And just to say, the Institute of Directors have gone public today, saying it would be a catastrophe to happen.
Well, across the UK, farmers are also worried about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, with unions warning it could be disastrous for British agriculture.
86 kilos, 2, 3, 4, 5, 86, 87, 87, 88.
Cattle and sheep farmers fear they could be hit with up to 60% tariffs on red meat exports if the UK has to revert to World Trade Organization terms in March. The EU is the UK's biggest market for lamb, and economists warn that steep tariffs could mean a collapse in exports. Auctioneers in North Wales are also concerned about live sheep sales.
Is there going to be tariffs on the lambs? You know, are we going to be able to export their lambs into Europe as the way we're doing now? We've got to remember that in excess of 70% of our lambs go into Europe at the moment. Is there going to be any tariffs? We don't know. We'll have somewhere like about 3,500 in total of animals in the market today. And you think when you've got 70% of them going into Europe, it's a massive amount of money involved for the farming industry.
Well, I'm joined now by the President of the National Farmers Union, Minette Batters. Are you yourself reassured or alarmed that the government is planning for a no-deal Brexit?
Well, we're reassured, and indeed we've been working with them on planning for a no deal, because it's very clear now that this cannot be left to chance, and if anything, no deal is the only certainty on the table at the moment.
What does no deal mean then?
I think this is one of the big challenges, that no deal doesn't actually cover off what no deal really means.
I mean, what are the implications of no deal?
Well, the implications are that route from Calais to Dover is a critical route, so 11,000 trucks coming in every single day with food and drink. But most of our critical dependencies, so if we look at animal medicines, if we look at seeds, if we look at fertilisers, those also come in from the EU. So animal medicines, 90% are made in the EU. Now, we've worked on a just-in-time basis, which has been about bringing in product, taking out product, all tax-free. That is all put at huge risk, bringing those critical things into the marketplace. And also, in a no deal, British farmers are immediately carved out of the marketplace, so they lose their export to the EU market. Indeed, there is no inspection point at Calais, so all the trucks coming into Dover would then, when we regain export access, would have to go back via Zeebrugge or Rotterdam. The other vital thing here is that government has made it very clear that imports will be coming in tariff-free, and that just can't be done to the EU. So the high standards that we have here, that British consumers expect, that cannot be taken for granted either, because we would have to open our doors to the rest of the world as well.
I mean, you seem to be tempering your language somewhat. In July, you said this was no deal was an Armageddon scenario. Was that a mistake? Was that Project Fear, or do you stand by that?
We absolutely stand by it. It's catastrophic. I have said we have looked into the abyss when we have looked at no deal, so we absolutely stand by what we have said. It's why we very cautiously supported the Prime Minister's package, because it allows for a level of orderly Brexit. But for British farmers, it is a complete catastrophe to leave the EU with no deal.
And what about British consumers? I mean, can you be confident that we would get enough food on the table under no deal?
I think it's going to be put at risk bringing food in, because there is such a significant amount that comes in, mainly fruit and vegetables, which, of course, we bring a lot of in, but we produce 60% of the food in this country. So in order to process it, to manufacture it, to bring in the vital things that we need, that relationship is critical. And losing market access and an obliteration of the tariff wall for imports, that opens up market access to the rest of the world, to countries that produce food to lower standards than our farmers do here. So it would effectively price us out of the marketplace, make us very uncompetitive. And when I think shoppers have got used to high standards, being able to buy more and more British food, it puts all that at risk.
But very briefly, I mean, the Brexit minister says that people, including some of your members, voted for Brexit. Politicians have got to deliver it, haven't they?
I think what was on the table when people voted is not what is on the table now. They were promised market access to the EU. They were promised more money. They were promised a bonfire of regulation. None of that has happened. So, you know, we have what we have, but it's not what they voted on.
Minette Batters, thanks very much.
And later in the programme, we'll be joined by the comedian Rory Bremner and the writer Robert Harris for an alternative look at what the Brexit future could hold. Now, some developing news tonight amid confusion in Whitehall over the expected publication of the government's long-awaited immigration white paper. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has the latest. Michael.
Well, John, I can report to you that the immigration white paper will be published tomorrow. We're expecting it in the summer, then it's been postponed and postponed and postponed. But it's a reflection of the extraordinary goings-on in government right now, that the rows over what should be in the white paper have been continuing even this evening. But it seems to be settled. The crucial issue is over the £30,000 threshold which will be applied to high-skilled workers, which currently applies to the rest of the world. The Migration Advisory Committee suggested to the government in September that should be extended after Brexit to the EU. That is now going to be in the white paper. The row's been going on between the business department, who aren't very happy about that being in there, and Downing Street, on the other hand, with the Home Office in the middle. But I'm told that nonetheless the £30,000 figure might be in the white paper, but there is going to be some further consultation on this. The trouble is they're going to have to hurry up over that consultation, because if there's going to be no deal, then some pretty detailed legislation needs to be passed before Brexit Day on the 29th of March.